Now we go into the, if you will, the second entree of this panel discussion, where we have the ITC, Mr. Jean-Marie Paugam, the Deputy Executive Director of ITC, to present the ITC perspective. And as I said in the beginning, you have to bear in mind that ITC has these two arms. It has one which gives the policy analysis, the studies, what are the barriers to trade, etc. And this is very important because it will set the frame of what are you doing wrong, what are you doing right. There is these barriers here, and puts the study, and that is what Jean-Marie will address, the new study that they have done, the new findings, and how to solve them, the solution. But they have another equally important arm. And to be frank with you, I like the other arm they have than this arm. But anyhow, the one that they do on the spot, the actual work, which they roll up their sleeves and they go to countries and they go with the different small sector companies, women, and wanting to export and to help them. And they have many successes through a program called ENACT, Enhancing Capacity for Trade, with not such a big amount of money, 3 million or something program that could be increased, and we hope that it will be increased. But it helps these people to on the ground, and you understand what are, besides this geostrategic stuff that we have been discussing, and Mr. Pascal Lamy talking about regional integration, the political. No, there are real barriers, and that we were going to hear from the different people. So I think that second arm also is very important, the practical, pragmatic. And I've seen it in Egypt with furniture, Egyptian furniture being able to be exported. We're going to hear it from the different examples. With that, so Jean-Marie, if you can give us the great results of the findings that you have found and its effect on employment and on youth and on women. Please. S'il vous plaît. En anglais ou en français?
En anglais. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Shukran, Sidi Rais.
Shukran.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman of TASDIR, dear Hassan, Madam Executive Director, Excellencies, Head of Delegation, Ministers and Ambassadors, dear friends. Mr. Chairman, first of all, thank you for your guidance since 1 year, because it is true that after the political turmoil from last year in some Arab states, we have been starting working very hard on this very simple question, but hard to answer: how to boost creation of jobs in the Arab world, in particularly for the youth, through boosting intra-regional trade. And you perfectly understood that we have two arms, but the good news is that these two arms have been working very closely. So we have been trying to combine both theoretical inputs and empirical evidence to try to investigate this question. And I'd like very much, before entering into the substance, to commend the great work which has been done both by our market research, led by Monder Mimouni, and by our Officer of Arab State, led by Ashish Shah. So we came with a paper which is summarized here and is available in a full-size version from ITC for those of you who would be interested. And I believe some of its findings are pretty innovative. Let me try to sum up this research by looking at 4 questions. The first one has been dealt with very quickly by Director General Lamy, is what is happening, how does regional integration looks amongst Arab states. And the initial situation is unfortunately well known. Arab states among us, that is League of Arab States, LAS, sometimes I will refer to the acronym. The Arab states enjoy very little regional trades in comparison with other regions in the world, as you can see on the slide which is being projected. And at first sight, it is rather paradoxical because the region should normally enjoy a very great cultural homogeneity. So we have 11% of intra-regional trade, which is pretty low. If we look at the other partners, you can see that most of the partners of the Arab states are being located outside the Arab region, which is the other face of the same mirror. And in particular, the OECD accounts for 49% of the LAS external trade. This is a static picture, but if you look at it in a dynamic perspective, you will see on the next slide that the external trade of the Arab states is growing pretty significantly over the years, from the bottom 1995 to nowadays. And there is a real dynamic expansion of this trade in the world economy. But the red component is still stagnating, and the red component is intra-regional trade. So this is pretty true in terms of dynamic also. And then to look under another angle, you can see that there is a dynamic of progression of intra-regional trade. It is not, it's not that nothing is happening, and you can see that on the blue curve on the top. But this dynamic, which is parallel to the expansion of Arab trade in the world, which is represented on the curve at the under level, has been broken somehow after 27, probably related to the world financial crisis. So, in a nutshell, on the first element, initial situation, the Arab states remain largely dependent from the rest of the world in terms of their supply. And this situation, we think, and we follow the intuition of our chairman, may correspond to important untapped opportunities for government, firms, employment, and eventually for welfare. So what is the second question? The second question is just why? Why is this not happening in the Arab region? Why it's happening in all other parts of the world? And we looked at several possible factors and tried to eliminate them one by one. First one has been referred to by the DG rapidly. History, natural endowments, comparative advantage could explain part of the situation. And the answer is only partially correct in our view. We have built an index of complementarity of the Arab trade, intra-regional Arab trade, that is complementarity of the external trade of member states of the Arab League amongst them. And we found that it was roughly 30% so 30 out of 100 index of complementarity. And this is not that much different of the complementarities that the same countries have with other regions in the world, be it the OECD, 34%, or other developing countries, 35%. So there is some sort of paradox here. The complementarity index is roughly the same, but the trade, which is associated with that, is much inferior because it's only 6% in amongst Arab states. So complementarity, natural competitive advantage, and objective situation is not the answer. So the second factor possible is that a consequence of protectionist trade policy, at least at the level of tariffs. And here the answer is essentially no. You can see here there is actually, it's somehow the contrary. Arab states have been quite politically bold in trying to promote free trade agreements, and you can see that there is a very developed web of free trade agreements within the region, which led to a situation where the level of tariff protection is quite low on an overall consideration. We can see that on the next slide. We have divided in three groups the average level of tariff protection. You can see that the first group, which corresponds to the poorest countries somehow, has a little of protection between 10 to 21%, but all the other are below 2%, and the majority is below 0.5%. So tariffs are not really the explanation for the impediments on regional integration. So the third factor was, could that be a consequence of important non-tariff measures? And our answer here, this is the heart of the paper, is essentially yes. And based on our investigation is based on a private sector survey methodology. So we are not dealing with governments here, we are representing what the private sectors in the Arab world is telling us, at least in three countries where there has been in-depth investigation carried out: Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia. And we found clear evidences that from the private sector perspective, the burden of non-tariff measures which are being imposed by Arab states against other Arab states is felt as higher than from other parts of the world. That's the first finding that is being illustrated here by the slide on the screen. Another finding was that LAS, League of Arab States members, impose more non-tariff measures on the industrial sector than on the agricultural sector, while other partners, such as, for instance, the EU, would impose more on the agricultural sector. And when we zoomed into the detailed identification of different types of non-tariff measures, one can see that there are several big ticket items like rule of origins, which account for 18% of the burdensome NTM for LAS countries, while only 3% for non-LAS countries. Rule of origin, finance measures, charges, taxes, and other paratariff measures. Quantity control mechanisms are the most often quoted non-tariff measures. This is a very detailed investigation, so we have a lot of very detailed results. I'm not going to present that now. It would be probably too technical, but we stand obviously ready to provide you with our more detailed finding. In a nutshell, there are also one interesting finding, which was that it's not that much technical regulation in the Arab world which are being felt burdensome, but the proof of conformity with technical regulation, which is considered the highest difficulty from your companies or Arab world companies' perspective. And this is a finding that we have been I'm exposing here for the Arab world, but we are carrying out this type of experiment also in Asia and in sub-Saharan Africa, and we have where we are also ITC is very much operating, and it's very convergent with the findings that I'm presenting here. So we come to our third question, which is important for policymaking, obviously, is that, and this is your concern, Mr. Chairman, is does this at the end matter for employment? And the answer that we came across with is an unmitigated yes, it matters. We ran a general equilibrium model taking for an hypothesis the possibility of reducing of 3/4 the level of non-tariff measures imposed to the private sector. And we found very interesting results that are being summarized here on the screen. Basically, in quantitative terms, we found that reducing this level of non-tariff measures would boost Arab external trade exports of 10% over a period from between now and 2025. This would correspond roughly to doubling, more than doubling actually, the intra-regional share of trade. So the effect of trade on trade is immediate. This effect on trade translates into a welfare effect of approximately 2% by year by the end of the period. And this corresponds to, at the end of the period, one simple number, which is 2 million jobs being created just by reducing the transaction cost imposed on intra-regional Arab trade. 2 million jobs, in absolute terms, is something very significant. In relative terms, we related it to estimation of the need for job creation in the region just to absorb the dynamic of the workforce being created. World Bank estimates, FEMIS, which is a network of economists, estimate. We came to the conclusion that these 2 million would represent between 5 and 10% of the yearly need for job creation. So this is not very costly and quite significant in terms of contribution to employment. Turning to the qualitative aspects, there are some important facts to take into account because they might need mitigating policies. Given the initial situation prevailing in the region, the impact will be more oriented on unskilled jobs in the manufacturing sector. And since unskilled jobs in the manufacturing sector are more likely to be occupied by male workforce in the Arab world today, there is a higher impact for male workforce. This is a type of findings that should be taken into consideration to try to coordinate employment policies and trade policy to obtain the desired result in terms of promoting women employment, for instance. Each country has to make his own mix on this, but the clear issue is that women may be more present in the services sector in the Arab world, and so the services sector needs more investment in terms of business environment, skill building up, and innovation promotion. So there is something to think about the qualitative result. Overall, our clear-cut finding, Mr. Chairman, is that if this is being tackled, there is a direct answer on the job market. So where do we go from here? We believe that it's very achievable to untap this potential by working at two levels where our organization can also provide support to your governments and your regional integration bodies. The first element is clearly that the game has to be played at the political level. DG Lamy referred to the need to foster public-private consensus on how to tackle this kind of barriers. This is one first element. The second one is at the Arab world level to implement fully the provisions of the GAFTA Treaty, which provides for NTM reduction. We can support that because we have this methodology of scanning country by country detailed NTM non-tariff measures that are being applied to the private sector. The second element is to build the capacities beyond the political dialogue to reduce the NTMs. We need to build the capacities for the private sector to comply with the NTM. So sometimes NTM will not be lifted because they correspond to some very legitimate stake like consumer protection, sanitary protection. So here we have to leave the capacities of the enterprises to comply with that. And some technical assistance can be provided with successful result, both at the enterprise level, but also at the intermediate level of trade support institution, that is Chamber of Commerce, professional organization. We have been carried out within our ENACT program, which is Arab State Capacity Building, some concrete results and solutions. Some have been showcased here in Doha 2 days ago with a glowing Jordan women business exporter showing the result of our action. Others are not as visible, but they are very important. Like, for instance, we worked with the Moroccan Leather Association. We audited all the leather sector with 20 companies very concerned to export to high luxury brands in the European market. We found out that only a few of them could qualify to the standards, and so we are now working on raising the level of the standards. I stop here, Mr. Chairman, because I'm already stepping in the following aspect of our debate with our enterprise representative. But I would like to claim that this reality check from theory to empirical finding and practice can represent and do represent, in my view, the best signature of our work. So I guess this leads me to our discussion. So, Mr. Chairman, over to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jean-Marie, for this presentation, and I think it is very much needed. What struck me about it, there are two things that I really found very interesting. I'm sure that some of our guests will discuss them. That one, where it said, when you found what are the reasons, that first the complementarity, and I understand from that the countries are having the same products, is only 30%, and this was always for many Arab people, we've always thought, and it was given always as a reason, that why aren't the Arab countries trading more? Well, because we're trading the same, we're selling the same things. But as your study says, that it's only 30%, which is within the normal world average. But the second more remarkable, and which I don't understand, you'll find that in the graph, in the pie chart that you've shown, you have almost the reasons given by the survey for the reasons for why trade is not going well between Arab countries themselves. 80% is between the technical regulations, which is 42%, and the other 40%, what you call the conformity assessment. And you will have to guess to elaborate on conformity assessment, because for me, when I hear conformity assessment, it translates into bureaucracy. That means to make sure that you have the technical regulations, okay, 40%. The conformity, that you make sure that this is within. And I remember once when some of the bureaucracies, when I went to apply for something, and the man told me, no, you have to give me a certificate that you are alive. I told him, but I'm here in front of you. He said, no, I'm sorry. Get me a certificate signed by this and this that you are still alive. And so this, I think, conformity thing, whether the because if it was only the technical regulations, which is 40, then you can by playing on that you can reduce it. But when you talk about the conformity assessment with the technical regulation, 80% or 80-something%, that's a big number. Another issue, which from the very excellent findings, I think that maybe we could have asked Pascal Lamy about, but he's not here, is also the issue that we talk about within the intra-Arab trade, is that it has been focused a bit on the European model where goods, trading goods. Is there a chance, if we look at the model of trade in services, does it make a difference? If we are trying to solve the question of intra-Arab trade integration and we're looking at it from a goods perspective and we have had such a limited integration, if we look at it in services, of course, when you talk about services, intra-Arab, it raises many questions. The issue of labor, traveling in the Gulf, the sensitivity of that, the issues of many other things that, but I think maybe that could also be an issue that can be discussed or you can elaborate on later on or some of the questions.